Track 31. Listening Review Test. In this test, you'll hear a number of different recordings, and you'll have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your answers. The recording will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the real test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1 on page 62 of your book. You will hear a conversation between a university student and a receptionist at the Student Health Centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Good morning. Can I help you?
Yes, I'd like some information about the Student Health Centre, please.
OK. Are you a student at the university?
Yes, and I'd like to register with a doctor here. But can I ask a few questions first?
Certainly. What would you like to know?
If you need to see the doctor, is it easy to get an appointment?
Well, usually yes. If you call at 8:30, then you can usually get an appointment for that same day. But it's first come, first served, so we soon get fully booked.
So what happens then? Can you make an appointment for the next day?
No, you have to call back the following morning. If it's urgent, we have a surgery in the evening at 5 o'clock. You can't book a time, but if you're on the list and you're prepared to wait, a doctor will see you eventually.
I see. And how long do you get with the doctor?
A standard consultation is 10 minutes. There are 20-minute appointments, but the doctor will tell you if you need to ask for one of those. Your first appointment is always a standard one.
OK, and if I'm too ill to come here, will the doctor come and see me?
Yes, of course. Do you live on campus?
Nearby?
Then as long as you ask for the visit by 9:30, there shouldn't be a problem. The doctors do home visits between 2 and 4:30 in the afternoon.
Can't I book appointments online?
Yes, you can. I can issue you with a username. It's the same system, though. You can't book in advance, and it's first come, first served. If you want to go on the urgent list, then you do have to phone in and speak to someone. You can't do that online.
OK.
You'll also need a password to gain access to the website, and you can only use that to book appointments for yourself, not for your friends.
Sure.
So would you like to enrol as a patient?
Yes, please. Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have some time to read questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
So, first of all, what's your surname?
Haworth.
How do you spell that, please?
Haworth.
First name?
David.
And your postcode?
TT437TY.
Is that 42 Garden Street?
Yes, that's right.
Good, so I can see all your details here on the system. Can I just check your student ID number, please?
Yes, that's 412398.
Thank you. Finally, which faculty are you studying in?
Well, I'm doing astrophysics.
So that's the science faculty?
Yes, that's right.
OK. I'll send you an email with all the details.
Thank you. Track 32. Now turn to Section 2 on page 63 of your book. You will hear a tour guide talking to people who are visiting a famous sports stadium. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now listen and answer questions 11 to 16.
Hello there. My name's Matt, and I'm going to be your guide for the day. Before your guided tour of the stadium begins, you have 15 minutes to look around the small museum we've put together about the history of the club. Now, you've all got a map of the museum on your leaflet, so let me just tell you where to find some of the most interesting displays. Firstly, I'm sure you'll want to see all the medals and cups that the club has won over the years. These are on the second floor, in the first big room you come to after you've gone up the stairs. You have to walk through this room on your way to the exit, but make sure you leave yourself enough time to have a good look round. If you're interested in seeing a history of the club in old photos, going right back to the 1880s, then you'll find that display on the first floor. It's in the first room you come to on your right as you walk down the main corridor from the entrance. You can also see the type of kit the team members used to play in at various times in its history, and a display in the next room on the same side of the corridor on the first floor. It's amazing how much fashions in shorts and shirts have changed over the years, and the display brings us right up to date. This room is really popular with visitors. Another display that I'd recommend is the one devoted to the history of the stadium itself and how it's developed over the years. There's an interesting interactive display where you can press a button and see how the place looked at different times in its history. That's in the middle room on the second floor. If you want to see how the club's advertising has developed over the years, then there's an interesting display of posters at the end of the corridor on the first floor, just before you go up the stairs. Finally, you can watch some of the finest moments in the club's history in the last room on the left-hand side of the corridor on the first floor. You can see old newsreels of some of the best goals and saves and see some of the most iconic players of the last 50 years in action. So enjoy your visit. I'll see you at the exit on the second floor in 15 minutes when your tour of the stadium itself will begin. Enjoy!
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
Okay, so is everybody here? I hope you enjoyed your look round the museum. So, it's time to begin our tour of the stadium. This is going to take about an hour, so we should be finished by 3:15. I know some of you have got a coach picking you up at 3:30, but you should still have time for a snack and a look round the gift shop before you have to go. The gift shop is open until 4 o'clock, so the rest of you are welcome to stay and browse. So, before we start, a few do's and don'ts. Photography is allowed, so feel free to take as many pictures as you want. But please say now if you're going to use a flash in case anyone has a problem with that. No? Okay. There are no players here today, so we're not going to disturb anyone. Please stay with the group. I'll be counting you as we pass from one area to another to make sure nobody's got left behind. And no eating and drinking, please. That's our only rule. We will be going into the players' changing rooms. They're not there, of course, but you'll see their shirts hanging up in the places where they normally get changed. You can touch the shirts, but please don't try them on. If you do that, we have to wash them between each group of visitors, and we don't have the staff for that. Finally, I'll be giving my commentary in English. Please do say if I'm going too fast or too slow. Okay? Great. And I'm happy to answer your questions. If you could save them until I've come to the end of my little talk in each area, that works best. I can't promise to know all the answers, but please ask anything you want. Okay, so if you're all ready, we'll start. Now this area, where we're beginning our tour...
Track 33. Now turn to section 3 on page 64 of your book. You will hear two students talking about a research project they are doing on the topic of recycling. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen and answer questions 21 to 24.
So let's talk about where we've got so far with the research project and then talk about the next steps.
OK. Well, our starting point was that people's enthusiasm for recycling had fallen off locally, and that seemed to be because of lots of rather negative reports in the media. So we agreed to investigate some of those reports.
Great.
Firstly, it was claimed that families are actually recycling less at home than they used to. Well, that's hardly the case, in fact. The local council's figures show that all households have 2 bins, and the amount of rubbish finding its way into the recycling bins, as opposed to the unsorted waste bins, has now risen to 70% of the total, up from 65% last year.
Great. I found much the same story for commercial rubbish. There, the rise has been slightly less, but from a stronger base. Recycling from commercial premises was already at 70% before and has risen to 73% in the last year.
Then there was the story about the size of the bins, that people found having 2 an inconvenience and tended just to use the one. I found a survey the council did on that issue published online. They asked 1 in 10 households and found no evidence of that. Most people welcomed the chance to separate their rubbish.
OK, well, I looked into the issue of what happens to the rubbish. You remember one news story said stuff from the recycling bins was being shipped all the way to China for processing, and another said that most of it ended up in landfill because there wasn't enough capacity at our local recycling plant where it gets sorted and the raw materials reused.
I remember.
Well, it appears that there is some truth in the first of those stories. Some refuse is sold to processing plants abroad, though I didn't find any evidence of that being China. The second point may have been correct in the past, but is no longer the case. A new recycling plant has just opened, and I was invited along to see it.
Brilliant. Before you tell me all about the plant, let's decide who's going to do what in the project.
Well, we're going to share giving the presentation, remember? 50-50, that was our agreement.
Yeah, but if you'd prefer me to take on all of that, I wouldn't mind.
Really?
Yes, because there are some other things that I think you'll do much better.
OK, but what have you got in mind?
Well, I thought we'd need to do some pie charts and bar graphs to show some of the statistical information in the report, and that I'd be pretty hopeless at that.
No problem. I like that sort of thing. I'd also like to do a flowchart showing the process at the recycling plant.
Fine, I'm happy to leave that to you.
But maybe writing the body of the report is more your sort of thing. Getting ideas across clearly and concisely on the page is something I find quite tricky.
OK, I'm up for that. As long as you see to compiling the references and appendices, that calls for your sort of analytical brain.
It's a deal.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
So, tell me what you saw at the recycling plant.
Well, I saw how electronic waste is dealt with.
You mean computers, TVs and stuff?
Exactly.
Does it all get recycled then?
Mostly. Some things which contain toxic materials, and so can't be recycled or reused, go directly to the direct destruction area, but everything else goes into a room where somebody plugs them in and switches them on to see if they work, what they call the testing area.
You mean people throw out perfectly good equipment?
That's right. If it still works or can be put right with a bit of simple maintenance, it can go to the redistribution centre for use by charities and schools and people who couldn't afford new stuff.
Cool. So what happens to the other things which can't be redistributed? What route do they follow?
Well, those items are classed as beyond repair. and they then get assessed and broken down into their constituent parts.
Dismantled, you mean?
Exactly. That happens in the dismantling area. And of course, not all the parts are capable of being recycled, so the next stage is a segregation area, where stuff is divided up into what's recyclable and what isn't.
So the unrecyclable materials get destroyed?
I guess so. I didn't see that part of the process. Anyway, they get removed, and that happens in the segregation area. The same happens to very specific materials that can be recycled directly.
Like?
Well, printer inks, photocopier toner, that sort of stuff has specific chemicals in it that can be recycled as they are. You know, the residues. They're called imaging consumables, so there's a special unit handling those. Another thing that gets special treatment is computer screens, monitors and stuff like that.
There's a special type of recycling known as CRT that applies to them.
That's right. Then the plastics and metals have their own recycling units and get reduced to little pellets or melted down.
Right. So, really impressive.
Brilliant, actually. I can't wait to start work on the flowchart.
Track 34. Now turn to section 4 on page 65 of your book. You will hear part of a lecture on the reliability of human memory. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 31 to 40.
We like to think that our memory is good and that we can rely on it. We say things like, I was there, I saw it with my own eyes, to show how sure we are that we've remembered something clearly. But how sure can we really be? Are we remembering an event exactly as we saw it? The answer seems to be not very sure. In 1890, the psychologist William James described memory as reconstructive. In other words, when we remember things and where we are when we remember things can affect how accurately we remember them. People are wrong, therefore, to think of memory as something similar to a video clip, which we can replay whenever we like, and which will always be the same. Memory doesn't work like that. One of the best-known experiments showing how memory actually works was carried out by Loftus and Palmer in 1974. They showed students a short film of a car accident. Then, they asked them to answer some simple questions about what they'd seen. Surprisingly, by asking different questions, they found that they got different answers. For example, if the students were asked how quickly the car was traveling when it crashed, the answer was generally about 60 kilometers per hour. But if the word contacted was used instead, then the students tended to say about 40 kilometers per hour. These findings suggest that the questions you're asked about an event can have a big effect on your memory of it. This is very important when the police interview witnesses after a crime. To avoid influencing what their witnesses remember, police officers ask them to remember an event in as much detail as possible before asking them any questions. Elizabeth Loftus's work led to the development of this technique, which is called cognitive interview technique, and it's now used by many police forces. Dr. Thompson shows the importance of memory in criminal matters with the story of a man who was accused of attacking a young woman. The woman identified him in a lineup of people, even though he was sure he'd never met her before. Fortunately, the man had a good alibi. He couldn't have committed the crime because he'd been appearing on live television at the time of the attack. Eventually, the woman realized that she'd been watching the TV program when the attack happened, and in her memory had confused the face of her attacker with that of the man on the screen. This shows just how easily we can confuse in our minds two events that happened at the same time, even when they were completely unrelated. In the past, people were often convicted of crimes on the basis of eyewitness reports alone. But because of the research that's been done, this doesn't happen so much anymore. What's more, several people sent to prison because of eyewitness reports have used DNA evidence, which is more reliable, to prove that they couldn't have committed the crime. Another thing that researchers have found is that it's also possible to plant false memories in people's minds without them realizing. In one experiment, Loftus convinced people that they'd been lost in a shopping center at the age of 5. To make the story convincing, she asked the participants' relatives for details of a real shopping trip that had actually occurred at that time, and then included these details in the made-up story she told them. In a follow-up interview, 25% of participants claimed that they remembered getting lost on the trip, an event that never happened. The fact that the participants' relatives claimed that the event really happened is very important. People will even accept guilt for a crime they did not commit if they're told that a colleague saw them doing it. This is very important in the legal system because people may be confused into making a false confession if there is enough reliable evidence. What all this shows is that we can't be as confident in our memories as we might think. So the next time you're arguing with a friend about what exactly happened at some past event, bear in mind that your memory could be playing tricks on you.
That is the end of the test.